What is up, Coordination? On the pod today, we are talking about Gitcoin Passport, which is a primitive for creating more Sybil Resistance. What is Sybil Resistance? This is resistance to sock puppet accounts. What are the ways in which we could go from a token-weighted Web3 ecosystem to a more democratic Web3 ecosystem, going from one token, one vote to one human, one vote, going from plutocracy to more democracy? So Gitcoin Passport is a tool that has evolved out of Gitcoin DAO in order to support the Sybil resistance, the sock puppet resistance, the democratic capital allocation at Gitcoin. And we are going to be going deep on what Passport is and how it can be useful in your project, how it works, and all of the things Gitcoin Passport on this episode. Before we get into the episode, just a quick reminder, I am known as a co-founder of Gitcoin, but I've since disaffiliated from leadership in the project. So I am in the role of podcast host this episode, and I've got two really amazing guests on the episode to talk about Passport. So Kevin Olsen is engineering lead at Gitcoin Passport, and he'll be talking about the technology behind Gitcoin Passport. And Jeremy Dillingham is the product manager on Gitcoin Passport. So this is the dream team working on Sybil Resistance at Gitcoin. Jeremy has been in tech for 25 years, spent 16 years in product management, building products across a variety of industries. Most analogous products to Passport was working in anti-spam projects 15 years ago and solving the spam problem in Web3. Olsen is an artist turned engineer, turned into engineering leadership, has been building software and software teams for 15 years, working with Gitcoin and the DAO for the last 18 months, helping Gitcoin decentralize, modularize its tech and products, and built and shipped Gitcoin Passport, which is the Sybil resistance tool, and Grant Stack and Allo Protocol, which are the public goods funding tools at Gitcoin. So I think this is a fun episode if you're into digital identity and Sybil resistance, and I hope you enjoy learning about Gitcoin Passport.
ATHENA DAO is addressing the underfunded areas of women's health, such as menopause and endometriosis. ATHENA is a community-driven DAO, giving women a say in decision-making and funding the scientific breakthroughs that impact their lives. With cutting-edge technology like Molecule's IP NFT framework, they invest in research IP that ensures exclusive licensing rights. ATHENA DAO is raising awareness to women's health research, working alongside existing organizations. So join ATHENA DAO today to help change the landscape of women's health research.
What's up, Olsen? What's up, Jeremy?
What's going on, man?
Okay. Really excited to talk about Gitcoin Passport today. So, Jeremy, first question to you. What is the Sybil attack problem, and how does Passport remediate it?
Yeah, so the classic definition of a Sybil attack is the abuse of a digital network by many illegitimate virtual personas. And so in common layman terms, and so that's a hat tip from the article Who Watches the Watchmen. In layman terms, it's people using multiple fake accounts or sock puppet accounts, as you've said before on GreenPilled, to attack a system. So that could be spinning up many accounts for an airdrop. It could be spinning up many accounts to vote in quadratic funding to game the system or to capture an airdrop. But it's basically a place where humans are getting boxed out by bots or fake people. And what Passport is a system that we've built that is a aggregator of identity provider solutions that helps to try to combat this problem by allowing an individual to capture and share their identity and reputation in a way that makes it easy for humans to prove they're humans and makes it hard for Sybils or bots to get the same type of score. And so what we've done is we've built a system that has sort of two sides to it. There's a dApp, which is at passport.gitcoin.co, where the end user has a really easy way of capturing those credentials or stamps that help to prove their identity. And then we have a system at score.gitcoin.co that allows integrators to be able to capture those passports or use those passports or create scores and do all sorts of stuff that helps them start to utilize Passport to protect those communities.
Olsen, anything to add?
Yeah, I think you nailed that definition. I think, some of the things that are important in this are we're trying to do a couple things. One, preserve privacy here, right? So one of the design choices we made really early on is that we won't store any PII or personally identifiable information, right? So everything we're doing is really kind of an attestation, just an observation that you have a Twitter account or you have more than 500 followers. You have, so much ETH, that you've held at one point or another. And these are signals that we're using to build up a picture of a person's identity. But we're not building anything that really doxes anybody. There's maybe a concern around triangulation, but even then we're trying to like obscure the exact numbers, right? So it's not possible to look at a passport and reverse engineer, oh, that's a Waukie's passport. The idea is that you have all of these signals that can be evaluated without having to reveal anything personally identifiable. And this goes that's the design choices that go throughout the whole stack. We can go into that if we want to, but the main thing I think is we're trying to do a kind of a tricky thing here, right? Build a very complete picture of a person without revealing any like personal information about them. So it's pretty rad, actually. I'm pretty happy with what we've arrived at. It's pretty unique in the space in that regard too.
Yeah, I would just add on to that because I think it's really important as we go down some of the principles that we're talking about. Besides privacy preserving, we really strongly believe in data sovereignty. So as also was saying, we don't store anything. We don't capture that information about your Twitter account or which followers you had or anything that would be anything close to PII. But we also enable you to decide if you want to publish that attestation of those credentials, right? So you could possibly qualify for 10 stamps and decide that you only want to push the fact that you qualify for 5. So everything is always in the end user's control.
Always opt in.
So to play that back, the Sybil attack problem is the problem of sock puppets, and Passport was devised at Gitcoin in order to start to solve the problem of sock puppets, which is especially acute at Gitcoin because the primary mechanism behind Gitcoin is quadratic funding, a matching coordination, a capital allocation tool that allocates funds to the projects that the poor and the many care about, not the rich and the few. And because your identity is kind of what you're voting with in quadratic funding, there's this attack vector where if I'm going to give $100 to a project, the most capital efficient thing to do is to make 100 different identities and to give it to that project so it allocates more of the matching pool. Passport is designed to stop that attack system, that attack vector, but within the constraints of we don't want to violate users' privacy, we want to create data sovereignty, and we want to create as much friction for the attackers as possible, but we want to reduce the friction for actual legitimate users to get into the system. So it was kind of created by the constraints of Gitcoin being a quadratic funding tool and wanting to prevent Sybil attacks on the quadratic funding mechanism. That's the way I play that back. I'm curious if either of you have anything to add.
No, that's great. I mean, that's exactly right. I think it's really important to think too about like the rational economic actor, at play here, right? So airdrop farming, people do it because it makes sense because they make money doing it, right? They're not doing it to distort like signals of user numbers or something like this, right? Like there's always this sort of like, you kind of empathize a little bit with where people are coming from. And the same is true for all of these like systems that are trying to reward user behavior, right? You look at these NFT platforms, they're trying to reward people for doing certain things. And they end up with a bunch of wash trading and a bunch of bots and this kind of stuff, right? So anytime there's an economic incentive, which is like huge, right? It's a big part of what we can do in this space is actually incentivize users for participating in networks and protocols. Be able to kind of gate people for like legitimate uses is super important. It's been something that's really been hard to do and kind of missing, right? So you see a lot of these different identity providers popping up that are trying to solve this in kind of like one lucky shot. And I think what's really cool about our approach is that we've decided to kind of take the sum of all of those, right? We're not trying to go all in on one solution. Gitcoin Passport's really intended to be this like aggregator of all of these really high quality signals and giving people a lot of choices about how they want to reason about those, right? There's a cool design space at the end. Once you have all of these attestations and stamps, you can decide, what matters to you and your community. How do you want to train, an ML model on determining what's a likely airdrop farmer from a likely bot from, somebody else, right? That's a very cool thing that's enabled by this primitive that, we have one use case, the quadratic funding use case, but we're finding that there's lots of communities that have really, really diverse sets of needs that are all benefiting from this. Now, actually, Jeremy, I don't know if you want to chat a little bit about that. That'd be super cool to hear about kind of like where people are seeing use cases outside of even just Gitcoin.
Yeah, for sure. And I just to add on that, I think there's an important thing here, which is that in the infinite game, right, or the red team, blue team, as we've talked about before, and I know you've talked about on this podcast, Milwaukee, this is a space where we actually can see the attack vectors as they happen, both in real time and in retrospective, which makes it really powerful for us to be able to adjust those stamps and those different credentials and the things that we need to do to continue to improve Passport to make it better, because we actually get to see that closed loop within the other side of Gitcoin of how that attack happens. But we're seeing lots of really interesting use cases. CyberConnect just launched with us a few weeks ago to use us to protect their raffle, and saw a pretty substantial decrease in bots from their system, which was really, really exciting to see. Somebody adopt it, they were able to integrate quickly and then actually see the impact of it quickly, which was really exciting. There's some upcoming airdrops that are looking to use Passport to potentially protect and against those airdrops. And we're working on integrations right now with both Discourse and Snapshot from a community protection standpoint. So how do you prevent spam, bots, false actors from, creating proposals in Snapshot or doing votes that don't matter, or, adding to, the community forums in a way that's destructive. And some of these, it's really difficult because, on the face, one or two of those actors may be harmless, but what we're seeing is that it's actually damaging to the communities because the people that are doing things are, trying to provide legitimacy for phishing attacks or other fraud that's happening in Web3. So it was born out of Gitcoin's need originally, but what we found is that there's just a huge problem in the space, that if we could solve the Sybil problem, and let me asterisk that, but if we could solve the Sybil problem, it's just a massive problem that lots and lots of players in the space need help to try to solve. And I say solve because I think in the end game, we don't actually ever eliminate Sybils or bots entirely, but we get to a place where it's too expensive to attack, or that we get to a standstill where there's some small percentage that are let through, but it's really reduced the problem significantly than what we're seeing today.
Let me just play back what I heard there. So there's a red team and a blue team. The red team are the attackers, the people who are trying to exploit the mechanism for economic gain. And then the blue team are the defenders, the people who are kind of setting up the tripwires and studying the attacker's behavior. And you'll never really ever solve completely Sybil resistance because there's no perfect way of knowing whether or not an identity is made up. We won't have perfect information because of the privacy preserving decentralized nature of this. And so the best that we can do is host an infinite evolutionary game where the attackers attack the mechanism, the defenders see how they exploited the mechanism, and then evolve the system for the next epoch, for the next Gitcoin grants round. And what you can do over time is that you can kind of make it costlier for an attacker so that it's not resource efficient for them to attack the mechanism. And over time, the system will go from being resistant to no one, to resistant to script kiddies, to petty criminals, to organized crime, to nation state actors, if you can get if you can set up the right trip factors in there. And so it sounds like this is kind of like an infinite evolutionary game, and we'll never fully solve Sybil resistance because these are complex systems with humans. But what you can do is you can set up this like kind of Quake Team Fortress, or like I'm thinking like Counter-Strike here, where Gitcoin or some other, where you maintain the blue team infrastructure. And then what you can do from there is you can just produce an API so that other people who need Sybil resistance can just derive from Gitcoin's data instead of having to set up the whole attack arena and solve game theoretic problems yourself. So I guess 2 points there. This is a hard problem. It's a big unsolved problem for this space, and it'll never be fully solved. But Gitcoin's kind of taking the brunt of figuring out a pluralistic values lines way of solving it, and then producing a data exhaust trail with Passport that other DApps can integrate with if they want Sybil resistance. How does that resonate? And is there anything I got wrong?
Yeah, I think it mostly resonates. I think the place today is that we are evolving based on the quarterly Gitcoin grants round. Like that's the sort of today versus and historical look. Where we're trying to go is to start to evolve in much more real time, right? So, the thing that's great is that we do own the Quake Team Fortress, or whatever analogy you wanted to use on the Gitcoin side for the grants round, which gives us lots of additional data that we don't have from just the purely Passport side. So Passport's privacy preserving and opt-in only, But when you start to use another system, like you're going to donate to a grants round, you're now providing additional data that isn't necessarily opt-in, because that's data that's captured for trying to determine if that is a legitimate grant or not. And so we can use that additional data to help improve our signals within Passport itself. But Gitcoin Grants is just one integrator. It's just one partner that we have in this system. And the more partners that we have in the system, the better and the faster we can start to respond. So we can see one attack vector for one blue team, whether that's our blue team or a partner blue team, and then use that to improve it for all the other blue teams, right? And so that's the goal of us doing that from the integration side. And there's still lots of work to be done on how do we have that data round trip and those feedback loops and do that in still a privacy preserving way, but that helps to improve the entire ecosystem. And then on the other side, with the identity providers that are part of the Passport system and solution, we're looking to continue to add additional providers. So in our language or our world, those are stamp providers or people that are helping provide credentials. So those are identity systems like our friends at BrightID. And we're looking to both add additional systems and also help to sort of improve those systems as they have new signals. So simplistically, we might find Twitter works today. 2 weeks from now, Twitter doesn't work as a strong signal. We either remove it or we replace it or we change the credentials on that. And so we're constantly seeing those vectors and figuring out how we can start to improve those. And so that's where it gets really exciting is, this pluralistic system, we start to make it more and more anti-fragile, and we also make the feedback loops faster. So you attack in one place and it's like now the immune defense is across all of the other places that you haven't even had a chance to attack yet. And so if we can start to do that rapid iteration with a broad community, then we get both more powerful immune response and we get it faster, which is ultimately the goal.
Also, anything to add?
No, that's brilliant, man. I like it. I like the idea too, just this sort of like summing up of efforts, right? So yeah, you're like having Gitcoin our own. We had our own needs, right? We had to solve them, finding the use cases outside of Gitcoin, but then being able to like work with these partners to like improve that scoring. And we have this scorer, which is kind of like that integration point, right, where everyone can kind of come back and get the quick access to anyone with a passport shows up, and you can quickly get a score. Our default score is going to continue to evolve, right? But we're also starting to realize through these partners that there's other kind of flavors of scoring, and we're starting to build kind of custom scoring for those communities, right? Like protecting an airdrop is different than protecting a quadratic funding round, and we're going to start having sort of different options for people based on their needs, right? So there's also like a place for people to bring a lot of like, design intelligence into this too, kind of push us to help them, partner with us to bring new and novel use cases. And we can keep improving either like the core default score or new flavors of scoring. That also feeds back into like new signals. Like maybe there's new types of credentials, or we have some really exciting conversations with different credentialing ecosystems. There's all kinds of cool stuff that can come through there. And I think that's what I'm actually most excited about, is getting the more and more signals in there, because, our particular approach of, DIDs and VCs and, the way we've built things so far, that's one ecosystem, right? But there's a whole kind of like ZK ecosystem that's spun up. Really looking forward to like figuring out how to start incorporating some of that stuff into this, and just kind of enriching that base data set. And then really like, again, creating that sort of like library of signals that people can start innovating on top of.
I'd love to get real tangible and talk about what is the user experience. So if I go to passport.gitcoin.co, which by the way is linked in the show notes, if I go to passport.gitcoin.co, what do I see? What can I do as a user in the ecosystem? How does it look and feel?
Hopefully good and easy. And if not, we want that feedback. So always reach out if you're encountering issues. But basically, it starts with you signing in with Ethereum to a wallet to prove that you have this particular wallet address and that you're giving us the ability to store the credential data, which we can come back to on Ceramic. And then we've added a new feature called Web3 one-click verification, which goes through really quickly all the things in Web3 that we can pull on chain, and puts all those stamps and credentials together to say, hey, this is what you qualify for based on what we were able to find, just to make it really easy to capture the first set of stamps. These are some new changes that we just pushed the last 2 months, which is making it less friction and easier for users to do. And so then you can choose whether you want to capture those credentials or not and publish them to Ceramic. And then there's a plethora of additional Web2 stamps that you can OAuth into. Say you want to connect Facebook and prove that you have a Facebook account. Again, like Kevin was saying earlier in the show, we don't store your Facebook ID or your profile picture or your friends list or any of those privacy information. We're just checking to see that you have a unique and valid Facebook account for Passport, and that we're saving that credential. If you choose to save it, that says that, yes, you have that, and you have a profile picture attached. And so it's really easy to sort of go and capture those stamps. We're looking to improve the UI over time to make it more fun for that sort of stamp capture experience. But once you've done it, that's it. And you get a score which updates with every additional credential that you add. So you can kind of see over time how you're growing and how you're doing. And then we tell you whether you're passing what is our basic, what we call our default unique community score, whether you're a pass or fail, because a lot of integrations and systems, including the Gitcoin grants, uses that pass fail for default unique community to do whatever it is that they're going to do. So in our case, it unlocks the matching on quadratic funding on the Gitcoin grant side. But this is a score that, as Olsen was saying, others can create their own scores. They can change the weights. They can change the thresholds that they want to use for their particular application. So it's kind of an 80-20 rule where most integrators we're seeing right now are using the default score and either the default threshold or a slightly modified threshold. So maybe they don't want 15 as their threshold. They want 20 as the passing threshold. And then there's a small power user base that's like, I want to entirely change the weights. I want to take some credentials out. And that's really fine. You can do that as well. And we're going to make that easier and easier over time. Eventually to where maybe there's a whole, I don't know what the right term is. I keep saying marketplace, but it's not really a buy sell. It's just like this open community of, hey, I like that model for this use case, or I want to use this other model for a different reason. And we'll continue to update our models, but it probably won't be the model, or maybe even the most adopted model, at some period of time, which is exciting.
Yeah.
So again, hopefully easy, hopefully
so
fast.
It feels like the front door is going to passport.gitcoin.co, clicking into any stamps that you want to connect, and not having to worry about privacy because it's not a zero knowledge proof. It's literally zero knowledge. The data identifying information is not stored in your verifiable credential. And then that's a springboard to contributing on Gitcoin grants right now. But it sounds like as more and more dApps integrate with Passport, the idea is that they can either use Gitcoin's scoring algorithm, or they can fork it and create their own scoring algorithm that fits their values. And the idea is that once there's enough data and credentials in Passport, then you're kind of creating a prism where people can formulate their own view of Sybil resistance. And so going through the front door for the user is just like a springboard to a Sybil resistant economy. But there's like a side door where if you're a dApp developer, you can also kind of start to take advantage of this data and either just use Gitcoin scoring algorithm or create your own scoring algorithm in order to leverage it for your dApp. I'm wondering if you could tell us about that side door. What is it like to integrate with Passport and to start siphoning off some Sybil resistance and some trust for your community?
Yeah, so I'll let Olsen talk about that in particular, but I would say there's a third way too, which is that you could just use the credentials. So we've seen in some instances, I don't want all the credentials. I don't want the score. I just want to know, do they have a Discord? Or, have they donated to Gitcoin grants? And they can just look at a one or two credential kind of system to just pass fail based on do you capture these credentials. So it's not as, again, it's pretty flexible and pretty open. But
yeah,
sorry.
I'll just piggyback on that before I give my answer. I think that's a really important one to talk about too. We talk about scoring a lot because we found that's probably the most effective way to get a broad group of people through and evaluate them and get a sense of kind of who's a bot or not, right? But you have a lot of people who are looking for something slightly different. Like, do you participate authentically in my community, right? Do you have certain stamps that I value as people who are likely to be good participants? And that's where you see people doing this like single one-off thing. I really want to make sure you have a Discord. I really want to make sure you have, a lens profile. What are the things that are more maybe a safe, maybe you have interacted with the safe. Those are just individual attestations, and you can build up your own logic in your own app, right? So we're not going to prevent you from just interacting with those stamps, aka attestations, directly and building up your own kind of logic. So that's kind of just part of it. but we do make it easier for you to get that kind of like bot or not score. And that's the default scorer. So that's pretty easy as well, right? So you can go to score.gitcoin.co, you sign with Ethereum and you can create your own score. You have some configuration options there and you get an API key. And from that, basically you can start making calls directly to our API and getting scores back for people who present their passports on your site. So that gets you pretty close to the one line of code in your DApp to be able to like hit an endpoint and get a score back and start being able to like understand if people are passing this threshold that you set in your score and allow them to continue on in your app or not. So yeah, score.gitcoin.co, that's where you go to set it up. If you have any questions, if you have any concerns about this, there's a couple places you can go. The first one is docs.passport.gitcoin.co, kind of a mouthful, but just docs.passport.gitcoin.co. That'll get you like all of the information you need on how to actually do all this, and it covers a lot more detail than we'll go into here. And then also in our Discord, we have a builders channel you can get in. You can start interacting directly with us in the core team. So that's the Passport Builders channel. I think if I have the builders role, but it's an easy thing to grab. So you can come in and start asking questions directly to the core team there.
I'm wondering how you think Passport differs from other Sybil Resistance tools out there on the market. It's June 2023. WorldCoin's been in the news a lot recently. Gitcoin's also integrated with BrightID, Proof of Humanity, and a handful of other Sybil Resistance tools. What's Passport doing that's different, and how does it differ from other anti-Sybil tools?
Yeah, so I don't think it's an us versus them sort of conversation. So in the frame, I'd like to think of it as much more inclusive. So one of the major ways that we differ is that instead of us just being a single point solution, we're an aggregator and we're across many of these different solutions with the ability to continue to add new novel attempts to stop Sybils as part of our overall sort of aggregation and defense. And what that enables for those identity providers is both more adoption because they are now having this big public passport integration that helps drive users to their solutions, as well as ideally data. And we can talk about this more if we talk about the future of how do we help improve the ecosystem, but more data to help them understand where they are and aren't being effective, potentially with blind spots that they may or not be able to see. So that's one sort of aggregation across many different providers. The second is that we really focused a lot of our time and energy, as Olsen was saying, on this. How do we get down to the one line of code integration where we've made it really, really easy to integrate and made it easy for folks to spin up and start using one or many of these additional identity solutions through us. And so we handle that, making that simple, documentation, all these things that are potentially tough or expensive for a small solution to implement. And we make it really easy for them to do that, which is great. And we've seen adoption happen within days. So people have been like, hey, we'd like to maybe integrate. And then 3 days later, they're like, hey, we're fully integrated and it's working, which is like fantastic for us to see. And then I'd say the third one is that we're pretty customizable, right? So as we talked about earlier, like it's not one size fit all. We make it easy if you just want to use our score. But if you don't, then there's lots of different paths that you can go down, as we talked about, of ways that you could implement beyond what we're doing. One of the most unique that I've seen so far is folks that are using our score, our credentials, and I would call it plus. So I want to use your score, and I want to give the user some additional score for actions they're taking within our DApp. So the most simplistic way to do it is I'll give you 5 points if you're also a paying user within our DApp, because I know who you are, and I know that you're creating value within our ecosystem, and you're more likely to be a human within our ecosystem because you're paying. Could be a way to do it. So you could take the Passport score plus the additional points, and you can set a threshold so that they can pass that or not pass that if they achieve. And so that just like the customizability of it, I think is really important. And the last thing is that we're not brand new, and so I frame this as sort of battle tested, right? We've been using the solution. We've been using the solution to protect our own Gitcoin grants rounds and seen it be effective and not effective in certain situations, and started to adapt it. And so some of the other solutions may not have actually seen that real world adoption yet, or had that, how does it work in specific situations that we can add that lens to, and we can help with score weightings to show how strong of a signal that particular provider is from our vantage point, from the attack vectors that we've seen.
Word, yeah, I agree with all of that. I think the framing, like especially around this, like this being really a plurality of scoring mechanisms, right? I think what we're trying to get at is that a lot of these other providers are intended to be kind of one provider. You buy into that ecosystem and you use that, and that's 100% of your Sybil detection, right? Coming from that one ecosystem. And so, I mean, some of them are quite, sophisticated. They put a lot of energy into it. There's whole teams and whole projects that are just working on this one thing. But I think that creates a certain fragility, right? That like if that solution is compromised, or if you find out that there is a big Sybil problem, or someone has, found an exploit, there's a big Sybil ring, at the core of that, that's a problem, right? There's stories in the news already around, not to pick on WorldCoin, but, people buying and selling a black market of identities, and this is just going to happen anywhere, right? So no single system is perfect, right? As soon as there's an economic advantage, someone will find a price for an identity and sell it, right? National IDs are not enough, right? You can, people can forge identities even in physical form. So the big thing for me is to create a system that is anti-fragile, right? Where if any one of these single providers is maybe not a 100% effective, you can get better effective, higher effective results from combining them. So this idea of us being an aggregator isn't just us kind of avoiding the problem. I think it's actually a unique kind of solution. It's kind of hard to compare us in some ways because we rely on the identity providers. They have to be building these things. They're generating these signals. There's some stuff we can observe, but a lot of them are trying to do a lot of work, and they're very high quality signals. But on their own, there's a certain kind of weakness to it. And it's only in this kind of combination that I think you get to something that is like as effective as we need for quadratic funding. And I think what other communities need as well. So I would go at it from that direction too. Kind of the plurality and anti-fragility, I think, are also things that are really unique in the Passport ecosystem.
What does world look like in which Passport's maximally successful? Say there's a primitive that creates Sybil resistance that DApps can integrate with, and it's anti-fragile to attacks and capture. What is the world in which you're massively successful look like?
So hopefully sooner than later. But if I cast my vision out, what I'd really like to see, coming back to some of these concepts we talked about earlier, is this graph of graphs, right, where each node is its own unique anti-Sybil system, and we're able to help facilitate the sharing of data across those systems such that we're improving them and they're getting better and better as we go. And we've got this open, decentralized, privacy-preserving, user opt-in system that we've built. Whether that becomes a protocol or not is still TBD over time, where anyone can add credentials to that system in a protecting way, and can add providers to that, can add new models to be able to score that just continuously enhance the ability for us to detect and stop Sybils. And like the end game there is that it's just really easy for end users to prove that they're a human, hard for a Sybil to try to forge that, and really expensive for a Sybil to forge that. So only in those, maximally efficient cases of massive airdrops would anyone even try to attack, because it's just not worth the time or the energy. Right? As you talked about earlier on that spectrum of, script kiddies or multiple identities on a very primitive form to nation states, we want to push it to really only that nation state sort of ability to attack would be the ultimate end goal. And there's a lot of steps in between there from my vantage point. But if we can get to that place where it's open and the communities are all getting better and better over time, and we're helping to facilitate that, that's a magical place for me.
Totally. I think for me, the big one for me is I think that it would feel a lot different to participate in Web3 communities once we have this, right? The biggest thing for me right now is getting it. I think it was after one of these big airdrops, someone was talking about how it was just like botted to hell, and a bunch of people who were legit users didn't really qualify, and a bunch of people were basically kind of going like, "Lol, learn how to code bots next time," And I thought that was really really revealing, the system that we have currently, where we keep handing capital, rewarding people for for scripting and botting our systems. We're literally, we have like a fitness function where we're actually pushing capital at people who are maliciously and exploiting these systems, right, for personal gain. And that's not, I don't think that's really in the ethos, right, of what we're trying to do, right? I think there's a real kind of power to the people behind all this, right? We really want to reward users. We want to exit to community. We want to see people own the protocols and, benefit from its success, right? And that's like completely antithetical to what you actually see in the world, where people are being like, lol, for whatever, man, learn how to code a bot and like get better at airdrop farming. Like that's crazy to me, like that's just not the like incentive and reward mechanism that's I think in the design of any of these systems, right? People are not thinking, how do I build the best community of airdrop farmers, right? But that's kind of what we've done, right? And we've pushed a lot of capital, I think, into the wrong people's hands. And I think what we'd like to see is like really like a return to like fairness, right? This is like kind of market fairness at some level, like this is like, you can debate insider trading laws and this kind of stuff, but ultimately the idea is that when I participate in a market or I participate in some project, that I should have kind of equal footing, right? The game's not rigged against me. But the problem we have right now is that like all of these systems are ultimately kind of rigged against the users, right? That you're not competing against other users. You're not necessarily buying NFTs from each other. You're buying against bots that are flash trading these things and wash trading them, and ultimately like milking all of these reward systems in ways that are like really not going to help you like own that system or have fair rewards distributed to you. So for me, I think it really gets back to more of that vision of like, community ownership, the right, actors who are like really good allocators actually getting rewards back to them. And I think seeing the mechanisms that are at the core of all of these projects actually flourish, because there's this massive friction that all of these systems are seeing because they're being exploited by rational economic actors, but it's because it's so hard for us to defend against that. So for me, I think it's getting people back into the center of this, getting fairness back into the center of this. And I think that that's what's possible once you kind of get the Sybil problem, under control.
It's a better, fair, easier world to be in. And I did work in anti-spam 15 years ago, and it's hard for folks now that are new to email to imagine a world where you were constantly being spammed. Yet you were still using those systems because you had to, and that's the world that existed for a long time until we sort of got the spam problem under control. And I feel the same way about this. It's very analogous. Like, as Olsen was saying, if we can do this, which we believe we can, it just makes it a lot better and removes a lot of ugly friction in Web3, because this is a huge problem for lots of folks.
Excited to follow the journey along, and having been involved in Gitcoin's evolution from the beginning, it's interesting to see to see it starting off as funding what matters and funding public goods, but sort of like a side quest has come out of that of, oh wait, in order to fund what matters, we need a way of creating more democratic systems. And so it's just interesting when you try to really go at this design space, how there's sort of a modular stack of tools and problems coming out of Gitcoin DAO that are each designed to do one thing and do them well. And so it's neat to follow the evolution.
Yeah, we're quite excited. Like I said, it's such a fundamental problem for so many people in this space. I think it's going to be amazing to see what happens over the next year with Passport. I could not be more excited.
It's going to be great.
Is there anything I didn't ask that you want to say? Maybe I'll go to you, Jeremy, first, and then Olsen next.
I don't think so. I mean, I think the place that I would ask the community to start to engage is get in there if you haven't started already. Create a passport. If you're a DApp provider and you've got protection that you want us to help you with, start to get involved, because we're at the beginning of our journey here, and we're looking for the community to continue to work with us so that we can improve this and make this the best solution possible to help resolve this problem in the space.
Yeah, I think it's that really getting people who want to build, right, like using this tool. I think we've established that it's a pretty big problem. Everyone probably has some element to this, especially if you're like distributing rewards or you're whatever paying for gas on transactions. You're going to get exploited by folks who can eke out some economic advantage. I bet you probably have some issue like this in your app or your ecosystem. Get involved, reach out to us, give it a shot. We'd love your feedback. We want to keep making the product better and better. And we think we've got a good start, but we do definitely need feedback from folks. We want to keep making it better. So get in touch.
Sounds great. Final question. If people want to integrate Passport into their dApps, where should they go?
docs.passport.gitcoin.co.
There we go. All right. Well, Jeremy, Olsen, thanks so much for joining.
Thank you, man. Thanks, Awagi.
Thanks, Kevin.
Peace and love.